Good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be with you all at this year's Tourism NI conference. The theme of this particular session is the power of digital. Just to give you a quick run through and things, you'll have to put up with me for about 10 minutes or so in relation to some initial context on that, and then I'll be handing you over to Nick Hall. Nick is the head of an organization called Digital Tourism Think Tank, and we'll get to hear from Nick some examples of what's happening in the world of digital with regard to tourism, and particularly learn from some examples of what's happening across the globe in that respect. So, to kick things off, and if I could just encourage you again, in the spirit of all things digital, to feel free to tweet during the session, and also to remind you that there will be time at the end for questions and answers and discussion, and feel free, as Mark has just shown you, to use the system in terms of feeding those questions through electronically. So, in relation to this, why is digital so important? And there's different ways to look at this to start with, and in the past I often used to throw up some facts and figures in relation to this. More recently I tend to use a list, something like the following, which to me I think really does say it all. So for example, excuse me, I've gone a little bit farther. The world's largest taxi company owns no taxis. The largest accommodation provider owns no real estate. The largest phone companies own no telecom infrastructure. The world's most valuable retailer has no inventory. The most popular media creates no actual content. The fastest growing banks have no actual money. The world's largest movie chain owns no cinemas. And the largest software vendors often don't write the apps. So if anyone's in any doubt still as to the power of digital, that kind of list really does say it all. Now in tourism, we don't necessarily want to go completely digital. It can, as we know, be a people industry. But that being said, we want to make sure that we harness the power of digital as effectively as we can. So, in relation to tourism, just a little bit of quick context on that. In relation to international tourism, first of all, Europe is very much the world's top region. In 2014, we had over 1.1 billion international tourists traveling the globe. Europe is very much the top region for that, both in terms of visitor arrivals and visitor spend. So we're very lucky that where we are in the world is part of that leading tourism region. And regardless of what happens on the 23rd of June, geographically we will still be part of Europe, even if we're not necessarily part of the EU. We await to see what happens with that. So in terms of Northern Ireland context, just moving forward, you could have the next slide, Jane. I think it's vitally important that we concentrate on those areas, those types of tourism that are very high profile at the moment. They're media friendly. We have a fantastic product in. They have momentum and so on. And John touched on some of those this morning, and that's particularly, for example, film tourism. We all know the great hit that Game of Thrones has been, what that's done for the profile and the image of Northern Ireland with regard to that. But I think we need to go further than that. We need a wider strategy in relation to film tourism. We can use Game of Thrones as the focus, as the catalyst. That will be the case for some time to come. But we need to build a wider strategy around that and base that around the other great movies and television shows that we currently have made here in Northern Ireland and that will be made here undoubtedly in the future. Golf tourism has been touched on again this morning as well. That is one of the most lucrative forms of tourism of all. If we can capture that effectively, that can do huge things for Northern Ireland tourism and for the image of Northern Ireland. And we know the profile that our top golfers have. We know the quality of our golf courses and the ever-increasing range of tournaments that we're getting to host. And as John mentioned earlier, the actual Open Championship in 2019 will be a huge game changer in relation to that. Not only golf tourism, but also, as we know only too well, with the current themed year, food tourism as well. And since I live in Portrush, you'll have to excuse the fact that a lot of those images are North Coast based, but we have some fantastic food and drink produce in Northern Ireland. We have some fantastic restaurants and places to eat and drink in Northern Ireland, and we're certainly highlighting that through the current year that we have at the present time. I sneaked in a little picture there. I'm a co-owner and director of Lacada, the new craft brewery in Portrush, and I just think that's a good example because we recently did the Northwest 200's first ever official beer. And that's the kind of thing I feel that we should be doing more in terms of the collaboration aspect in tourism. And in that case, marrying together or expertise in relation to artisan food and drink produce with our expertise in hosting world-class events. So, how do we harness these globally and compete globally in relation to that? Well, a lot of it really does come down to what we do with digital tourism. So in particular, we hear a lot about the pre-trip side of things. We hear a lot about marketing in relation to digital and promoting the destination. But it's not just pre-trip. It's increasingly whilst the tourist, while the visitor is with us, in terms of how we manage and provide that experience. And it's also post-trip as well. So it's very much the three levels or the three layers that deserve a great deal of attention that way. That leads me on to the digital landscape. The next diagram really shows you one way of representing that, and it can be quite a complex landscape to navigate. That one there just kind of maps it out in the style of the London Underground. And you have your different channels there. You have your core website in purple, for example. You have your social media channels in green. You have your analytics in brown, and so on. And it can be a reasonably complex picture, as you can see there. But it's how do we grasp what's truly important, and how do we focus on getting the most out of that? Increasingly, I feel it's about four key aspects. It's about mobile, it's about social media, it's about connectivity, particularly Wi-Fi connectivity, and it's about big data and how we analyze the data that we have access to in that way. In terms of Northern Ireland context, moving forward here, a figure I came across about 6 or 7 months ago, 50% of marketing spend in Great Britain is now digital. But in Northern Ireland, that figure is 14%. That doesn't mean we're not using digital here, but by and large, we're not spending or is investing as much in it. And we need to start to take that, I think, more seriously and get away from perhaps the view that some aspects of digital, particularly social media, have often been seen as a free form of marketing or advertising. And that's not necessarily the case. It's certainly becoming less of the case all the time. But think about the obsession that we have with social media and mobile communication. That has gripped the public at large, and we need to find ways to harness that when it comes to industries like tourism. Some people have rebelled against it. You've probably seen notices like that. We do not have Wi-Fi, talk to each other, pretend it's 1995. 1995 doesn't seem that long ago to me, maybe I'm getting older. But when we think about it, we couldn't do all of those things back in 1995. But other people have embraced it. Other people encourage their customers to take photographs, to tweet them, to post them on Facebook, to share them, and so on. And I think it's not about rebelling against it. It's about how we embrace it, how we harness it, how we turn it and use it to our advantage that is the key. Think about the obsession with selfies. Okay? That has really gripped the world in that sense. And an interesting one that I saw being tweeted last year, selfie accidents have killed twice as many people this year as unprovoked shark attacks. So we probably shouldn't laugh at that, maybe quite so much. But nonetheless, people now are so obsessed with taking selfies that they do so in very dangerous situations, and some people have died from doing that. But what digital does is it gives us reach like we've never had before in terms of how we can reach potential customers, potential tourists, how we can give them an experience, how we can maintain that relationship with them, even once they have left, and encourage them to return. Having said that, it's vital that we understand that reach. That has been evolving, that has been changing. So for example, as I'm sure many of you know, some of the social media platforms like Facebook now will limit the reach that you can have with your fans and followers. They quote something like 6%. In reality, it's often less than that. So unless you pay these days, you can no longer reach very often the full range of people who follow your social media. It's also then about being creative. It's about looking for opportunities that you can leverage. It's about the power of imagery. It's about devoting time, which is often overlooked when it comes to digital. And it's about using customers where you can to do the marketing for you and trying to be smart about it in that sense. Think about the power of celebrity. You have there the next president of the United States. Hopefully not, hopefully not. But traditionally, something like celebrity endorsement was very, very expensive. But what digital can do is it can bring those costs radically down. That's a very good example I've used a few times recently where I saw David and Fiona from Short Cross Gin, they had obviously sent a bottle and a card to Snow Patrol. They tweeted that with a picture of the product, and they have over 200,000 followers. So there's an example of celebrity endorsement that has cost very little, which traditionally would have cost a lot. It's increasingly about video, particularly what we call micro video. Recent survey from Skift. If you've never looked at the Skift website, I encourage you to do so, skift.com. Very good for looking at some of the latest innovations and trends and surveys that's happening in the industry. A recent one from them, 71% of travelers now look to video for their vacation ideas. And particularly that's video that's relatable and it's authentic. Those are the two key words, relatability and authenticity. That's becoming easier to do. We have a number of bespoke apps around now, like Periscope, that will make it easier for you to shoot, edit video, to share that, to post it on social media channels, and so on. So how we do that, how we achieve it, has become much easier than it used to be. There's no need to pay specialist video firms to do that for us. And it's important to understand that digital is now mobile. How we engage, how our users engage, how our customers or tourists engage is going mobile. And eventually, in the not too distant future, will become entirely mobile in that sense. So that creates a certain expectation in terms of people's experience. Other stuff I came across recently from some surveys was that as many as 1 in 3 international travelers now place access to good quality Wi-Fi as their number one comfort when they're traveling. The same survey mentioned that I think it was 53% of those international travelers said the first question that they ask a restaurant before they decide to eat there is, do you have Wi-Fi? So that's a bit crazy. Not the food, not the price, not the location, any of those features, but do you have Wi-Fi? So it is a bit crazy, but it is happening, and we need to realize that. In terms of the data side, what we call big data these days, and I think that figure there from Eric Schmidt really says it all. From the dawn of civilization until 2003, humankind generated 5 exabytes of data. We now produce 5 exabytes of data every 2 days, and it's accelerating. So we produce as much data every 2 days as was created between the beginning of time and 2003. If you're not sure what that is, it's 2 to the 60th power bytes, or 1 quintillion bytes, or 1 billion bytes. So it's important that we engage in analytics when it comes to digital, and that's analyzing the data that we own, that sits behind our own websites, that sits behind our social media platforms, that sits behind any apps that we might use, and so on, but that we combine the analysis of our own data with that bigger data that is out there in ever-increasing volumes. Pulling that together then, it's about the brand that we create through these different digital channels and mechanisms, and that brand that we then create, in this case, for Northern Ireland and for Northern Ireland tourism. Increasingly, it's not just creating that brand ourselves, it's what we call co-creation. And digital has allowed the customer to really co-create brands with us in a way that was never to the same level previously or before. And it goes back to that old saying, which you may have heard before, your brand is not what you say it is, it's what your customer says it is. And increasingly, customers are co-creating those brands with us. But it's then about bringing it back, and it's personalizing it. And it's about the personalization that digital allows you to achieve with the customer that will enable you to capture them and make sure that they have a worthwhile experience. Finally, then, it's about being able to adapt. The whole world of digital, as I'm sure you know, is changing, evolving, developing at an incredibly fast pace. So what we need to be able to do is not just harness what it does now, but make sure that we can adapt to how it changes, how it evolves. So it's about being flexible. It's about being willing to adapt and not being too set in our ways. It's about being responsive to change. And I'd like to leave you at the moment then with a quote related to that, a quote from Charles Darwin. Darwin said it's not the strongest of the species that survives, nor the most intelligent, but the one most responsive to change. That's true in life, it's true in business, it's true in tourism, it's particularly true in digital tourism. Thank you.